recording, that's fine. So good morning everybody, welcome to this fourth evidence gathering session of the APPG on social integration. Thank you to our witnesses who have joined us today, Paul Reddish, George Grima, is that the correct pronunciation? George, is that the correct pronunciation?
It's Grima, but that's
George and Matt Hyde. So thank you all three of you for joining us. I'm also joined by a colleague from Parliament, Paul Howell, who's also on the call, and there are representatives of British Future and my office manager are on the call as well. I would like this to be a conversation, so you are not in the witness stand as such. So it's the purpose to gather sort of empirical evidence and your views rather than putting you on the block. If I could start by asking you to each give a short introduction to yourself, your organisation, and how your organisation has helped with the COVID pandemic, volunteering, etc. If you can limit that to sort of up to 5 minutes, and then I can dive into some questions. So just starting from my screen, if we can start with you, George, please.
Yep, sure. Hi everyone, I'm George Grima. I'm the CEO and founder at Do It. Do It is essentially a tech organisation. So we've built a platform that makes it easy for people to basically do their bit. So those that want to offer help to the charity sector, in a formal setting or informally, to connect with others and just be a neighbour or deliver kind of shopping to someone who's isolated, etc. We've tried to make that as easy as possible. We've been around for a while. We work with actually 70,000 organisations have created profiles on Do It, and we have about 700,000 individuals that have joined Do It. And we essentially try to match them. So we're a marketplace, but we're also a network. So we want to encourage people to connect with each other, to connect with other organisations. So we're kind of a hybrid of something akin to a Facebook and an Airbnb or an Amazon. So that's our kind of background, and our mission really is to help people to connect more, do good things, and be happier and healthier as a result. So for us, COVID as a tech kind of infrastructure organisation, we've seen a massive influx at the start of the crisis of people that just wanted to do their bit. They're coming to the platform. And on the other side of that, we've had, again, as a marketplace, we've had the charity sector itself. The number of opportunities that they've been creating on the platform is actually down quite a bit this year. So we've kind of, for us, we've seen a bit of an imbalance in the marketplace, if we can call it that, and the supply and demand between people that want to help and the availability of ways they can help in a formal setting, at least. We've definitely witnessed a really big increase in the number of people that want to do something informally, self-organise. Everyone's kind of familiar now with mutual aid groups, and probably last year that wasn't such a common thing. So this kind of dynamic of people just wanting to do their bit, possibly being frustrated at the lack of formal routes to do that, sort of taking up responsibility themselves to form groups and just get on and do things, has been an interesting dynamic. And again, as a tech platform and as a network, that's something we've responded to quite quickly so that we can enable more of that. So we kind of wear a couple of hats now at Do It, and traditionally we've been focused more on formal volunteering. We've shifted now to also kind of broaden and support the informal side, and really just people connecting with each other. We think there's an opportunity to play a role as a kind of an infrastructure platform that basically makes it easy for other organisations to use our technology and for people to use our tech to come together to do good things ultimately. So for us, it's been a pretty full-on year, let's say. We're all pretty exhausted, but we're also quite excited about, I suppose, the visibility there is now around volunteering, around kind of local communities, around people wanting to do good, and in particular, actually, the benefits from that doing. So how the individual benefits actually in terms of their own well-being, building skills. Lots of people we've been speaking to that have been using the platform are coming at it for different reasons. So we're feeling that there's a really big opportunity to be a broader platform, broader way for people to improve their own well-being, and that big umbrella. So for us, giving back is one segment of a broader piece of the puzzle. So we're less transactional now, individual charity, meet in the middle opportunity. We're much more a broader kind of platform that helps people to basically find their own pathways. So we're removing barriers essentially.
Thank you. Could I move on to you, Paul, please?
I nearly made the fatal mistake there of starting on mute. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, sure. So Volunteering Matters, who have the pleasure of being the chief executive of, operate right across the UK in many communities in a volunteering setting. Some people will know the charity as CSV, or Community Service Volunteers. It rebranded sort of 4 or 5 years ago. And essentially, we run a set of programs, over 100 altogether, and they support isolated older people, support for care leavers, youth social action programs. But we're actually not programmatic in the way we work, and this is key. We're about developing places and creating space and agency for local people to develop their own social change ideas. And then we put the structure and support in place for them to develop those ideas. And that's seen incredible change over the years. You know, those that start with no agency, or seen as those that might be the ones that need support, end up being the champions for change, and the people that volunteer and support the connections in their communities. And we've seen the benefit of that in some of our communities in COVID. So if you look at our programs in Suffolk, where, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were bringing groups of young people together that felt marginalised, were at risk of county lines or gang grooming. We gave them a safe space, and they're now influencing the safeguarding board. They're delivering toolkits on gang grooming into all the schools in Suffolk. And then when COVID hit, they got together off their own back and started creating family packs to go out to younger children to start, you know, ensure that those messages were still being developed behind closed doors and things like that. So for me, that sort of role of giving agency in communities is really important as a volunteering organisation, and investing in that infrastructure outside of a pandemic is what supported a lot of the community action that then for us has taken place. The second thing we've done in addition to our key work is we've played a convening role for at a national level for government and partners, where as part of the VCS Emergencies Partnership, we set up a coordination cell to effectively help advise and steer government on you know, what's going on out there in terms of volunteering throughout the crisis. And that's been fascinating. You know, I think it's been clear to me that you know, over the years there hasn't really been an investment in understanding of volunteering and the power of it across different social areas, and we've suffered from that a bit during this crisis. To be honest, it's something that I would definitely like to see change. You know, volunteering by its nature doesn't just sit in the Office for Civil Society. Volunteers are part of our children's hearing system. They're in schools running reading programs. They might be the only person an elderly neighbour sees that week. They're talking to people with suicidal thoughts. They're going into our prisons. They're helping our children stay active. They're preventing the NHS from being overwhelmed, and they even campaign for our politicians when they're trying to get elected. So, you know, they really do cut across every single policy area. And yet we don't proactively invest in volunteering in our policy thoughts across government. And I've seen that this year as I've worked with the civil service on this. And if there's one learning from it from me, we've got to invest in the infrastructure and support for volunteering right across government if we're to really harness what we're starting to see at a strategic level.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, volunteers are the glue that knit our society together, and one of the objectives of our APPG is raising that level of integration on the policy agenda. So by your participation today, you're helping inform that policy for the future. So thank you for that. Matt, if I can come last but not least to you for your introduction, please.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. My name's Matt Hyde. I'm the Chief Executive of the Scouts here in the UK. And you're probably fairly familiar with the Scouts already in your constituencies. In relation to this committee, social integration has been at the kind of heart of Scouting since our formation, since the original Brownsea Island experimental camp, which was about bringing then boys to from the poorest parts of the East End and the best public schools to demonstrate they have more in common. And today we are 460,000 strong young people here in the UK and 160,000 adult volunteers. And we've been preparing young people with Skills for Life for the last 113 years through a non-formal structured program. Young people aged 6 to 24 learn by doing and develop skills for life. So that's what we do. We've also got 60,000 young people on our waiting list who can't join, even though with having 160,000 adult volunteers, that's by far and away our highest number. And so clearly the beating heart of what of Scouting lies volunteers and volunteering. Actually, it's a mark of the dedication of our volunteers that of quite how committed they are, that they are twice as much, that they're likely to volunteer twice as much as the wider volunteering population, so about 16 hours a month, and the majority of our volunteers, about 84%, volunteer at least once a week. And in addition to those 160,000, we also have 93,000 parents who help out occasionally as well. It's really quite remarkable, their impact and the impact across the country. In terms of Scouting in the pandemic, I mean, like everyone, it's been a pretty challenging year. But within a week of going into lockdown back in March, we launched something called the Great Indoors. We produced 200 activities for Scouts and non-Scouts to do at home, and 550,000 families downloaded those materials and used them during lockdown. Our volunteers showed incredible ingenuity and innovation by shifting Scouting online. So Scouting by Zoom, so to speak, 85% of our 7,200 groups ran sessions online. And we're very grateful to Zoom themselves, who gave free licenses to all Scout groups throughout the country. So there's been 180,000 Zoom meetings, would you believe, this year in
I've been to one in my constituency.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Darlington is thriving, and it's a really good example of an area and where the sort of sheer hard work and passion of volunteers has meant that they were able to adapt, move the program online very quickly. That was so important at a time when kids weren't able to go to school and they weren't seeing their friends. And when our members told us that 2/3 of our young people told us that their mental health had worsened in lockdown. And so what we saw there was that provision continuing. And more recently, we've seen the return of face-to-face Scouting. So in bubbles of 15 plus 5 adults, COVID secure, risk assessed, socially distanced, Scouting has returned face-to-face. We've got about 56% of our groups now meeting face-to-face. And again, it's a testament to those volunteers who had to work quite hard to jump through all the bureaucracy that you inevitably have to in order to get Scouting back up and running. But what I've been most surprised by is not just the positive impact on the young people's mental health, but the impact of the mental health on the adult volunteers as well, who themselves have been able to go and reconnect with young people and get outside. The one thing we might want to come on to, and I'll just finish on this point, is I've mentioned about the gap there already is in terms of the demand and the supply, and the number of people who want to join Scouting. Our research from our own Scout group says there are 23% of Scout groups who are concerned about closing due to lack of volunteers. And it's something we might want to explore even more, because of the social good here is so important. We can't allow that to happen.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to launch into some pre-prepared questions that I've got. They're not in any particular order. and they're open to all three of you to contribute to a greater or lesser extent. So first of all, can you each tell me about the demographics of those people that have come forward to volunteer during the crisis, either informally or formally through your organisation? And have you seen, I think George has already answered part of this question, have you seen evidence of an increase in levels of formal or informal volunteering over the last year? So if I can start with you again, George, please.
Yeah, as I sort of mentioned at the start, we've definitely seen a big influx of new people. So traffic to our site back in March and April, we had about 400,000 people visit us. And I would say that, yeah, most of those just wanted to do their bit. They didn't come, I don't think, with preconceived ideas of necessarily formal volunteering. They just wanted to help. There was a crisis, and that was the motivation. But as a second, the last few months, what we've seen much more is kind of quite open statements from people that themselves are struggling. So people are kind of being quite open about the fact that they're struggling, mental health issues, or they're out of work and they're looking to sort of volunteer as a way to build skills, to get back into work. Job centres are sort of referring them to volunteering and so on. So we've seen the second kind of wave, I guess, and just as this crisis has moved on, we're seeing kind of, I guess, more of the people understanding that volunteering is actually quite a useful thing for them to be doing. It's either instinctively understand that, or they're being referred to volunteering by a carer of some sort. So it's, for us, we've kind of always felt that needed to come to the formal with the general sort of brand of volunteering, let's say, the benefits to the person doing it. So we're seeing that's, as a sort of byproduct of this difficult year, that seems to be the case, that people are just understanding that now. So and it's we're seeing a lot of young people, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, posting in our community saying they want some really touching messages. They just want to help. They want to do things. And we're seeing older people that, sort of 60, 70, 80-year-olds that are kind of, again, posting. And we're like a social network, essentially, and they're posting, introducing themselves to the community, saying that they want to help, explaining maybe they're passionate about a certain cause. So it's really quite sort of emotional stuff, actually. So it's pretty, we feel quite like, we're playing quite an important role here. But as Paul said, we could definitely do more support to kind of make this easier. We're all struggling ourselves a bit. So I think the importance of all of this is clear, and hopefully an outcome of these sorts of conversations, there can be more support from government at some point. But yeah, that's my rambling take.
Paul, if I can come to you next.
Sure. I mean, first thing I would say on the demographics and what's happened in this debate around, has there been an increase or a decrease in new people? I think we have to accept that COVID is such a unique set of circumstances. We can't really compare what was happening with volunteering before with what's happened during COVID, and we might not ever really be able to fully answer that question because the circumstances are so unique. Of course, formal volunteering declined, but it declined because we were in lockdown and charities had to sort of immediately shut down services or repurpose them. The volunteer group that were over 50 or vulnerable all had to stop volunteering immediately. And some of the programs were there to support face-to-face those groups. So the conditions of COVID, have created a sort of a unique set of circumstances that make it really difficult to benchmark what's actually happening. However, what I will say is that there are some trends from pre-COVID that I think have accelerated a little bit through it. We know young people are our highest cohort that volunteer, not the middle group or the old, but they volunteer less in terms of the hours they contribute versus older people. So there's a sort of a moving trend to volunteering with all the investment we've done is on the rise with young people, but perhaps the type of volunteering and the way they engage is different. So there's some trends in that. And then with informal volunteering or community organizing activism, that has for a while been more prevalent with sort of the middle group, those that are sort of working age from 30 to 50. So there's some trends that were happening anyway that probably have been accelerated a little bit through COVID. The other thing I would say with what's what started to happen is that people are more aware of what's happening on their doorstep. So rather than worrying about sort of, you know, who's volunteering, who's not volunteering, what COVID has done, because the only way people could get out the house, unless they had a job where they were a key worker, was to volunteer, is open their eyes to what's happening on their street and what's happening in their place and what's happening in the. So people are much more aware of the local community issues. And I think that's the opportunity out of COVID, is that you've got more people aware of what's going on in the street and their neighborhood and the issues that people face and how they can help and support that. And that's probably the area I think we need to focus if we're looking at what's to come out of COVID in a volunteering context.
Thank you, Paul. And Matt?
Yeah, I think Paul's right in terms of just, I suppose, focusing on this was a unique set of circumstances. I mean, in a normal year, over 75% of Scouts support their community on a weekly basis. And we, of course, saw some of that at a time of national need this year, whether it be Scouts in Oxfordshire helping out with supplying medication, whether it be the campaign we ran nationally on care to care homes, where we got 10,000 Scouts making connections with local care homes and building relationships there, or the £380,000 we raised for the Big Night In. So we saw some of that civic action in our own numbers. But I just want to pick up on this point about formal volunteering, because I do think it's important and why we saw a decline. And there are different reasons for that. The first one, as Paul touched on, it was clearly around those in high risk categories who were shielding. So over 13% of our adult volunteers are over the age of 65. So that immediately had implications on their ability to engage. We also have had a lot of anecdotal feedback even now about people who are concerned of contracting the virus and then not being able to go back to work. So, and for those reasons, have been reluctant to return to face-to-face scouting. For scouting and guiding, I know that there is a disproportionate high number of key workers. So understandably, whether you were teachers or people in the health service who weren't able to participate because they had obviously, understandably, other priorities, and a lot of people's lives have just been turned upside down, and therefore fitting in a weekly activity like scouting or other youth services have just not been able to do so. I mean, our sense is that we will know more on this, I should say, at the end of January, because that's when we take our annual census. So our data will be better then. Our sense is that our recovery will be V-shaped, is that people will come back, and that's what we're hearing. But that we will lose people, because there's something habitual about volunteering for many, many people. It's about, if you do it week in, week out, you can continue to do it. If you break that habit, that gives someone the possibility of taking that break for a bit longer. We've seen the digital divide, so particularly for when we started to move people onto Zoom and delivering scouting on Zoom, that's just not what some people signed up for. It's not why they do it, or why they've done it for a number of years. And there has been
I've got a whole series of questions about the digital divide.
Oh, okay, well, we'll come back to that then. I mean, the other thing is, and this is not consistent throughout the country, but we believe from the conversations we're having with county commissioners that there is something of a north-south divide here. So if you've been in a geography of greater restrictions, it's been harder to maintain morale and return numbers, because you haven't been able to meet face to face. So I mean, our hope is that will change, but look, just to finish on a more positive, we have seen some groups grow in terms of their volunteers. And that's partly because parents and carers have been seeing in the home what their children do week in, week out. And have actually, I've been stopped by people saying this has been a lifeline for their kids, and it's the only time of the week they heard their child laugh. So as a result of that, they've been inspired by that. And we hope to translate that level of interest into volunteers as we come through and bounce back.
Matt, you raise a number of interesting points in terms of that bounce back. And my next question, I'm not sure if Paul is still with us, and Paul did indicate he wasn't necessarily able to stay for the whole session. Paul, is there any questions you would like to raise? We don't seem to have Paul.
No. Peter, what I've just done, you probably don't see me come in and out. I've just switched devices, so I'm on my phone now, so that I can continue to listen for a bit longer.
Okay.
Second guy who was talking about volunteering, I think there's a link there into my APPG, which I'll catch up with you later. I'll continue to listen for a while for now, just while I'm trying to get myself started moving. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. So you've each touched on the quantity of volunteers that have come forward and the demographics of those, the issues that you faced in terms of recruitment. One of the things that we particularly want to concentrate on this report is, and also what we've covered in our other evidence sessions with other witnesses, is how we harness the benefits of those people that have come forward during COVID. So can you talk to me about how we harness the increased number of people coming forward, and what are your respective organisations' strategies to continue to recruit and harness that volunteering? Let's change it around. If I can go to Paul first, please.
Thanks, Peter. I guess if I may, when I think about this, what I would say is that there's always been an enthusiasm for volunteering amongst the public. I mean, pre-COVID, we had 16 million people volunteering. I think what's different with COVID is there's an enthusiasm for volunteering in political discourse and in media discourse. So, and that's having an impact. And I don't want to confuse the higher profile volunteering has amongst sort of Whitehall and local authorities as a result of the emergency in the media, with for me a suggestion perhaps the public is more interested in volunteering. They always have been. And actually, I think the opportunity is to harness that enthusiasm as opposed to the general public, and that in turn will have benefits. And if I may explain a little on my thoughts on what that might need to look like or might not need to look like. The dangerous thing when we think about harnessing is that we come up with some program that's generated in Whitehall or somewhere else that is the ideas of a few that then tries to capture something that doesn't want to be captured, because frankly people giving up time is a personal choice, and it's very cause-based and it's very local. So perhaps for me, the thing that needs to happen to really harness this is as I mentioned in my opening remarks, an increase in understanding within Whitehall and the media of how volunteering supports social change, policy areas, and how infrastructure and community and organisations through things like the Levelling Up Fund can be invested in to really help flourish. Because it's all about relationships and building on what's there and growing that out, and that's what leads to the social change and the enthusiasm. So that's where I would focus my effort if I was you.
So Paul, thank you for that. The purpose of this group will be to inform policy, and I think what we're looking for are examples of what your organisation's strategy are to help inform that discourse about what that policy is. So this is an opportunity to share with us your plans and ideas for harnessing that. I think we all would acknowledge that Whitehall doesn't make people volunteer. It's local community need, grassroots, that causes people to volunteer. Matt, if I can come to you next in terms of your strategy, I'm particularly concerned about your statistic there of 23% of your scout groups are potentially going to fall through the lack of volunteers, and that would be a tragic circumstance. So what are you doing to tackle that potential problem and continue to grow?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's been two principal threats. One's been around funding, and one's been around volunteering. And in terms of funding, I mean, we're very grateful. We've secured funding from the Pears Foundation and DCMS that will help to go some way to targeting investment of those groups most in need. So you're absolutely right. The battleground now is around volunteering. and we have a volunteer line management chain where volunteers line manage other volunteers, which is very, very effective. Again, we as organisations can sometimes suffer from the same challenges as government, which is London telling the rest of the country what to do. And I think that one of the strengths of our system is that local line management, because it's local people understanding local communities. There are two principal ways in which we currently recruit our volunteers. In the main, 90%. Most of those are parents or carers who want to get their kids into Scouts, come along for a short period of time. We have something called a 4-week challenge, which is you bring them, you ease people in, you give them an experience of volunteering, and hopefully they then get the bug. And I'm the product of this as well, you know. So when this is what I did when I became chief executive. I started as a volunteer. I never realized even then quite how much fun it was going to be, but how rewarding it was going to be, and the impact on my mental health and well-being as well. So that will remain a key target audience. It's absolutely clear that parents and carers will still want to get their kids into Scouts, and therefore they can play that role. The other way is we have a pathway in to adult volunteer leadership, which is we have 19,000 14 to 18-year-olds, our Explorer Scouts, who are young leaders. They often do this as part of the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, as part of their service element. But the great thing about that is you've got people in the habit of volunteering, they get the bug, and then you keep them in. So they're the two key routes. What we think is the third and new opportunity is about how we do things differently. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves sometimes as charities that we have to reform our own ways of doing things. That is about making it easier to join. It's about investing in digital. It's about investing in tech. We're about to do a new piece of work with Girl Guiding about, again, this is funded by the Pears Foundation, which is a web-based tool to make it easier for people to choose how they volunteer. And then it's about adapting our opportunities, because it's going to be rare in the future to have the old days of the Scoutmaster who comes in, week out. I mean, I can't do every week when I'm volunteering. So you need a team-based approach, but you need also specific new roles that people can dip in and out of. And that's quite a shift for how organisations like ours have run traditionally. And I think there are lessons here from RVS in the pandemic and what they've learned from the Good Sam app and others around micro-volunteering. So smaller bite-sized opportunities that then within that, people may choose to go further. And then the final thing I suppose I'd say on this is just about reaching new communities. We have our own experiences and track records of where you invest in a particular community or area, you invest in community organisers, you will grow. So one of our fastest growing areas is in the Muslim community. And that's years and years of investment of both paid support, but also volunteer community champions who've able to unlock those opportunities. So there isn't a silver bullet here. There are different things for different communities, but you've got to strategize it, you've got to plan it, and then you've got to execute that in a way that we'll be doing over the next year and beyond.
Matt, can I just ask you two quick supplementary points? You mentioned interaction with the Duke of Edinburgh scheme. Do you interact with the National Citizenship Service? And you mentioned the micro-volunteering through the Good Sam app. Now, I have anecdotally heard of difficulty, certainly in my constituency, where people had volunteered, but they lost their motivation because they weren't used sufficiently enough.
Absolutely.
So if you could just comment on those 2 points, please.
Okay, NCS. So we had a pilot scheme with NCS up until the summer this year, which was exploring how we could entwine, if you like, the Scout program with the NCS program. Because what we didn't want to do is, if you take a load of Explorer Scouts who are going to go on camps in the summer, you don't want to say, don't do your scouting, go and do NCS instead. you want to do what we do with the Duke of Edinburgh, which is through scouting, you earn your Duke of Edinburgh bronze, silver or gold.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, that has stopped. I mean, you're probably aware there's a review of NCS and youth services in the spring, and we will be feeding into that, and we're having a good open conversations with NCS. I think this is an opportunity to evolve the model in a way that many of us have argued for a number of years on an outcomes-based model, rather than being too prescriptive about the specificity of the program, which means that organisations that are like ours can't deliver it. So that's NCS. On Good Sam, and I've heard the same thing about people both who signed up and didn't hear things, but also people who signed up and lost their motivation. I think, you know, for me, there are lessons here. If you go back to the Olympics, where there was that incredible database of interest that kind of waned, the lesson here is capitalizing on the moment and moving quickly to signpost opportunities to people, which may be in health and social care, may not be in health and social care, but do it while there is that interest and while people have been in this period of these strange times, but where they've actually been open to doing new things. I think there is a window of opportunity here, and inevitably the world will move on. We will get the vaccine. We will move beyond the pandemic, but also probably people's openness to do new things will close as well. So I think there is a bit of a ticking clock here to get on top of these opportunities.
Thanks, Matt. Could I just ask you to just drill down a little bit further in terms of you very interestingly talked about activity in the Muslim community and getting them involved in scouting, which I would anticipate was probably a community that was not traditionally aligned to the scouting movement. Could you just talk to us a little bit further about how you've done that? Because I think that's really key to some of the objectives of this APPG on social integration and making sure that all of our sections of society are connected.
Sure. I mean, it hasn't, that community have not been as prevalent historically in the UK, but we're a global movement of 55 million scouts in nearly 200 countries. So actually there are a lot of Muslim scouts worldwide. And the reason for that, as with many faith groups, is because of the alignment with our values. Now we're open to all faiths and none. But there is something about the program that we deliver, the values that are absolutely aligned with the values of Islam. And this was before my time, originally invested in a small 2 or 3 staff members from the Muslim community who went out and built relationships. It was the efforts of some very remarkable young Muslim scout leaders who then set off on a path to instill that inspiration across the country. And then what they would do is they would work with the local community or the local county commissioner to identify certain areas, engage with different mosques, identify a plan, but also they will do training and support and break down those barriers. And I think what I'm also as interested in is that there's I mean, we're all genders, all races. I'm struck by how many young Muslim girls are particularly in the Scout and Explorer age range, Explorer Scout age range of 14 to 18. So this opens up a lot of really interesting opportunities for us, and I do think I think it is absolutely relevant to your APPG, because it's a method of how do you genuinely get local engagement. Now you might get predominantly or sometimes exclusively Muslim scout groups, but being part of a district, what's happening there is you're getting all the other interactions with those different scout groups. So if I bring this down to my local level in St Albans, the fact that we were able to engage with a group that was based near a mosque in St Albans meant that we got exposed, all of that, those young people got exposure to that mosque, and now we've built really strong relationships with that group going forward.
Thank you, Matt. That's really inspirational stuff. George, can I come to you in respect of the same question about maintaining enthusiasm for volunteering and recruitment?
Sure. Yeah, I think well, this point was touched on already, but for me, it's the problem is really around silos and connectivity between different things. So if we talk about Good Sam as an example, you know, yeah, lots of people were encouraged to go and sign up to the Good Sam app to support the NHS. I think hundreds of thousands in the end. But you know, that in itself is a silo. You know, other thousands of charity organisations and other groups that would have loved to have had some support from this group of people can't participate inside the Good Sam app. It's not an open marketplace, so to speak. So really, we feel that kind of move, we understand why that happened, but it kind of just cements the core issue here, which we see time and time again, is that there's lots of narrow lenses on you know, volunteering. And even if we talk about government, so we you know, talked a lot to DCMS. DCMS ultimately kind of, you know, is the go-to when it comes to volunteering. But as I explained earlier, you know, we're interested in people up and down the country for all sorts of reasons finding good things to do. So as a tech organization, we don't run our own programs. Do It can be very kind of agnostic about this and just think about kind of technology, marketplaces, networks, and some of these principles. And we see that, you know, DWP, for instance, looks after job centre networks. They are referring people to do volunteering. That they understand the benefits of that. So there's that context. You have social prescribers that work across, you know, GP surgeries for, you know, CCG groups, etc., that are referring people to do volunteering because it's good for their mental health or their physical health, etc. And then you have the kind of civil society itself. So there are these different, I guess, departments essentially across government that don't join up. We see we're looking at the kind of the big picture, and we're just seeing people and understanding why they might volunteer, trying to make it easy for them to discover different. So the scouts, for instance, you know, recruit on the Do It platform. We make the scouts visible to users that come to Do It, as we do with all sorts of other programs and charities. And you know, there's this kind of, I suppose, sometimes it feels to us like there's a bit of navel gazing, specifically at the you know, the kind of context of volunteering itself. And yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I know Paul would like to ask something, and he is due to go very soon. So if I can just quickly swap for a second. Paul?
Yeah, appreciate that, Peter. Thank you. It was really just a comment to Paul Reddish, just to give him a context of where I'm coming from. In my APPG, one of our big issues is actually getting to the communities that haven't got the volunteers. You know, it sounds as though he's got some interesting thoughts in there. I'm really disappointed that I'm going to have to drop off because I'm just about to hit a train. But I really would just thank Paul and the other contributors for what I've heard there. It's really been interesting. And I'll catch up with you, Peter, later just to make sure I get a fuller briefing of the rest of the session, if that's okay.
Safe travels, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, George.
Yeah. I've lost my track. Yeah, so essentially, I think that's maybe we're in a luxury position. We don't create the programs, as I say. So just with our kind of focus on the technology and us being an infrastructure layer, if you like, we you know, we know that there's a ton of great stuff going on across the country, different groups doing different things, and we just want to sort of really explain the benefits of investing in and supporting digital infrastructure more broadly. It's not so much, and that goes to the core of, I think, how government potentially could improve its support of the sector, because, as I said, the kind of cross-department collaboration, and we see that if we just look at the volunteering sector or the civil society, even within that sector, you know, it's been better this year because there's a crisis, people have kind of pulled together, but at times there is naturally a bit of kind of, you know, we focus on everyone's position, and kind of people are fearful, and encouraging collaboration is quite tricky. And I think that's something the government could help with. And so sending hundreds of thousands of people to an app potentially, I think, where no one else can connect with that, and then not particularly open to sharing data and sort of so on and so forth, is a good example of where strategically decisions are made that are maybe not, in my opinion, not always supportive of broader infrastructure. They're reactive. They're not necessarily kind of planning for the longer term. And I think that's what really, if something comes out of these sessions, that would be a really key point for me to get across, I guess.
Thanks, George. Moving on, one of the things that Matt referred to was a north-south divide, and I just want to explore a little bit further whether we actually have got an issue that's a north-south divide, or whether it's a divide between well-connected, civic engaged, well-connected, integrated communities and less civically engaged communities. And leading on from that particular point, does volunteering have does it have an image problem? And how do we make sure that we are getting people volunteering and engaged in parts of our society that are not normally so? Does volunteering have an image problem? And what can each of your respective organisations do to break down prejudice about your respective organisations and volunteering to make sure that we get more untypical people getting involved? So if I can come to you, Paul, first.
Sure. And Peter, yes, your assessment, I think, is fair and right in terms of, infrastructure and where it sits, and the correlation between, in some cases where there might be higher levels of inequality, and the infrastructure and footprint of charities and civil society in that space. There's been quite a bit of research done by NCVO on it, and there is clearly some disparity across the country in terms of where that infrastructure is or isn't, and where it's been invested in. So I would just agree with you on that point, that it's and it is clearly all linked, because the stronger the infrastructure is, the greater the opportunity to sort of do some of the things that Matt's talked about around sort of bringing in different communities and things. So the two are definitely linked. In terms of the sort of the image question, I would say it's probably more a identity crisis than an image problem, is the way I would describe it. And volunteering by its nature is quite simply somebody giving up time to do something good for somebody, and it's a spectrum of things. Running an errand for a local neighbour, right through to going through a 3-month training programme to become a volunteer paramedic for years with St John Ambulance, and everything in between. And I think one of the things in the volunteering discourse is that sometimes we sort of don't help ourselves by saying, well, informal's on the rise, and formal's, and then does that mean one's better than the other, or is one volunteering and is one not? And we almost seem to draw ourselves into this protracted debate about what is or isn't volunteering, and it really doesn't matter. And that's what I mean by an identity crisis. I think what we need to focus on is how we can support people in whatever way they wish to do it, to be able to sort of give their time into communities. And I think if we spent half the time focusing on that we did on debating the merits and pitfalls of the different types of volunteering, then the decade-long plus identity crisis would be well beyond us, and we'd be focusing on the right things. So I'm not sure it's got an image problem. I just think we need to sort of embrace it in all its forms, and accept the connectivity between all of these different things, and not worry about whether one is more needed than the other, because it's all needed, and it all helps communities.
Well, Matt, coming to you.
Just start with your first point. I mean, look, inevitably, where there is less investment, fewer jobs, greater poverty, there will be less time and ability for people to volunteer. I mean, that just stands to reason, doesn't it? And as Paul said, there's lots of data. I think MPC and certainly NCVO have done other research on this. The question is, therefore, what can you do about ensuring that there is greater volunteering opportunities in that area? And now we've got a track record of this. So we've opened Scout units, 1,280 Scout units, or sections as we call them, so cub packs, Scout troops, just under 1,300 in the last 5 years in areas of deprivation. We did that because we had a clear strategy. We actually set out with a target of 500 and we smashed that, but we've got another 500 we've now targeted. And the truth is this, and I've got to question 4 without mentioning funding, so which is probably not bad. You've got to invest. You've got to invest in it. So in something like the so the Youth United Foundation, which is the network of the uniformed youth organisations, for about £20 million over the last 7 years, we have created 40,000 places, one-off funding in an area of deprivation. And that was because we targeted that funding. Some of it was what was DCLG, then it was DCMS funding. And what it enabled us to do was to put boots on the ground, or walking boots on the ground, if you like, in those areas to recruit and train volunteers, ideally having staff members that were from the local community, that went into schools, inspired those kids, then said, go home, talk to mum or dad, whoever's at home, seek to get them involved if you want to join. Then you would get a small community town hall event. And then that's how we've created those sections. Tried and tested every time, £550 one-off per opportunity in an area of deprivation, where on average the child has about 4 years experience in scouting. So you can do it, but you've got to invest in it. That's why the Youth Investment Fund is so important. It's great that the government have recommitted to that as a manifesto commitment. I just want absolute clarity that we're still talking about £500 million over the next 5 years. It's why the Levelling Up Fund gives an opportunity to think about how we are really investing in the social infrastructure and the fabric of civic society in a way that will last, and not just become reliant on state funding, but actually put wind in the sails. And it will also involve funders like we've had from the Pears Foundation, who allowed us to open up areas, for instance, in the northwest part of Bristol, in Avon, one of the poorest wards in the country. They worked with us over 5 years to not just open that provision, but make sure it was sustainable. And I remember going there and speaking to a mum who was out of work. She was struggling at home. Her kids have been going to Scouts. They'd opened this new group. She said I said to her, it must be fantastic to see your kids enjoying this wonderful experience. And she said, oh, no, I'm not volunteering for them. I'm volunteering for me. And that for me just communicates again about if you start to see volunteering as in relation to the health benefits and the benefits to the individual, then you have a greater prize. Then you start to have interesting discussions about social prescribing connectors and what that really means, and but you've got to get people over the door first of all. I mean, and then finally, sorry, because I've talked a lot on that answer. I don't think there's a volunteering image problem. I don't think volunteering has an image problem. I mean, we grew our volunteers by 60,000 over 7 or 8 years. It's about how you reposition what those opportunities are. So we did a big rebrand. We we leverage a really diverse group of celebrity ambassadors that make something. It's something, you know, from Bear Grylls to Tim Peake to Ellie Simmons, that you draw in. Then this is an exciting place to be, just as you would if you were marketing anything. And then I just think, and look at the growth in younger volunteers. So I think what we've seen, again, in terms of the increase in the number of young people volunteering over the last 10 years, is totally inspiring and should be grasped. And I'm not entirely sure we did grasp it as well as we might have done in the pandemic, but it's not too late.
Thank you, Matt. George, does volunteering have an image problem?
I don't think it does, but to a certain extent, do it. It sounds terrible, but doesn't care that much, because we really, I think Paul sort of mentioned the same thing. We are interested in people doing good things, and we're not this narrow definition or terminology. We really want to sort of step away from that, and for us, it's formal volunteering is a good thing to do. We believe lots of others do. So is informal volunteering. So is, you know, phoning someone up who's lonely. So is playing sports. So is visiting a local museum. And we've talked about well-being. You know, that kind of is the other big theme here. So if volunteering is good for well-being, well, what else is good for people's well-being? It may be playing sports is good. I assume it is. And there are, again, it's back to that point I kind of made earlier about the different silos. Really, we see everything through the lens of ecosystems, but we want to make sure they're connected, because at the end of the day, everyone's different. You know, they kind of, what someone can or can't do depending on the time available, or even can they afford to get a bus to go to the place to do the volunteering. You know, there are all these different practical barriers and variances across the country with people that we think it's better to focus on tackling those and basically being less less kind of constrained by, do we focus solely on volunteering? Is this formal? Is it informal? As Paul basically said. So I think, is there an image problem in volunteering? I don't think there is personally, but I think there's a realization for more people across the country that actually they instinctively want to do something good. They want to do things that have an impact on their own health and well-being, their own opportunity. And volunteering, they understand, is one of those things. We could do more to make that obvious. But for us, as a technology platform, it's about reaching as many people and providing really simple pathways for them to discover formal volunteering, if that's the thing that we're talking about, or to discover sports, if that's, you know, guys in other departments in government are interested in more people playing sports. So we sort of take, again, a kind of pretty agnostic view of all of this, and we strip it really back to simple things like doing good things, connecting more, and being happier and healthier as a result. So that's all we try not to get too bogged down in, and we don't have the resource, to be quite frank. We're just focused on building the tech, so we can kind of duck out that one and leave the floor clear for experts in the volunteering world. So that's my take on it anyway.
Thanks, George. I know we briefly touched on this already in some of the earlier responses, but what can we do in terms of changing policy, government policy that is, to actively encourage greater participation in volunteering from those harder to reach groups that don't necessarily normally engage in volunteering? I'm just conscious of time. This is a really fascinating discussion, and I'm sure that we could stay here for several hours, but I am conscious of time. So we're sort of in the last 25 minutes of the session. So if you can try and keep your answers a little bit shorter and punchier, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So Paul, if I can come to you first. Sure,
thank you, Peter. I think you know, Matt's mentioned it, the funding word, so I'll mention it again. I mean, clearly one thing that you can do is look at where there is disproportionate investment in infrastructure and communities, and look at ensuring that the investment finds its way to the right places to be able to support proactive ideas of how communities can be enabled to support each other. And that you know, that's an overarching point that I think needs to be looked at and addressed. What I would say is, if you look at sort of where infrastructure has established, you know, I shared a platform at the group conference a couple of weeks ago with a lady who'd formed a charity out of the Tottenham riots. If you look at the overlay of mutual aid right now, you know, it was stronger and moved faster in Manchester and boroughs of London where there've been terror attacks. So, you know, there is evidence to show that, you know, in times of crisis, communities mobilize, and then if crises happen again, that they're more able to respond. So one of the interesting things about this pandemic is it's obviously impacted all of us nationwide. So the big question is then, you know, how can we how can we build on that in terms of that infrastructure with a lens on the people that wouldn't have traditionally engaged? And you know, I think this is all about understanding how they can be supported to do what they want, rather than trying to encourage them to come into existing structures. So I think having a look at the overlay where the lack of investment is one thing, and then accepting that this is organic and bottom up, and actually that investment then needs to go into a conversation with, for example, a community that you're looking to target, about how you can encourage them to participate, as opposed to, we want more people to apply for this, or we want more people to volunteer in that. You do those two things together, that will have the biggest impact, I think.
Thanks, Paul. George?
Yeah, I mean, we're focused on basically sort of practical problems that mean, for instance, young people, as an example, you know, can't afford, I mentioned it earlier, always to make it to the place to do the volunteering. So how do you ensure that, you know, they're reimbursed or expenses are covered in a way that's easy for them to access? Maybe it's a mobile digital wallet, supports payments and expenses, etc. Can you reward young people for coming on? How do you incentivize them? How do you make it visible to them? And I touched on this earlier as well. It's about the various kind of organizations and places that young people come into contact with. So it might be schools, colleges, job centers, it might be GP surgeries. All of those are potential touch points that can, you know, if the systems are in place and infrastructure is there, can much more easily kind of be pointed into the direction of volunteering, or whatever that good thing is that's going to give them the benefit that they're looking for. So it's digital passports. We're busy kind of working on a pilot, pulling that together. So essentially making it easier to onboard into volunteering and not having to repeat that process every time, and, you know, wait for DBS checks and so on. It can be quite, there are lots of practical barriers and blockers that kind of mean certain groups just don't even go near it, because they're just put off right at the start. So that's, for us, they're kind of, again, you might be surprised to say, as a tech, it's the digital element that we feel can, you know, is a key part of this conversation ultimately, the investment in the infrastructure. So whether, you know, what program sort of is fashionable, Scouts is great, but maybe in a few years' time, for whatever reason, people decide there's this is better, or this is more suitable for that. That can flourish, and kind of campaigns will come and go. Money will be spent on promoting this or promoting that. Ultimately, there are always some consistent themes that sit under the bonnet, though, that need to be invested in. And if that's taken care of, we feel like that's a key part of the puzzle, and what comes thereafter will be much more fluid, and supply demand issues, all those things start to become less of a problem. So yeah.
Thanks, George. And Matt, tell us the changes.
I think this is about what sort of country we want to be. So if I was the government, I would have a bold and ambitious overarching volunteering strategy that looked at the short, medium and long-term opportunities here. I would and I would then properly invest in it, and I would focus absolutely in terms of this being about leveling up across the country with both with targeted initiatives, but also that where you learned from different things, where you piloted things, you iterated them, and then you saw what you could scale up as well. I would embrace some of the initiatives that are in Danny Kruger's report on civil society. Absolutely, I think the volunteer passport scheme is worth embracing, and I think that's a really good initiative that actually could then align to benefits for volunteers as well. I think Danny touches on this, but I've been banging on about the Young Scot card for years as a joined up, integrated way of giving young people a way of recording what they're doing, but also loaded with benefits and rewards as part of that could be applied to transport or other things that then would target some of those barriers. I would pursue the annual I'm not sure about calling it an annual Neighbours Day, bank holiday. I think a community day, or something that really focuses on encouraging people to go out in their community and do something good, that would unlock every organisation, all the organisations from Rotary clubs to women's institutes to youth organisations, to the span and spectrum of civil society, and use it as an opportunity to showcase all that's good about communities. I'd extend the Employment Rights Act to make it easier for people to volunteer, and extend some of the same rights that you would if you were magistrates. And then I would look at the long-term opportunities here for that I mentioned earlier in terms of young people, and I would absolutely embed volunteering in the school curriculum. There's fantastic research by the Jubilee Centre at the University of Birmingham that we did when I was a trustee of Step Up to Serve, who run the I Will campaign, that you're twice as likely to volunteer later on in life if you've done it by the age of 10 than if you've done it by the age of 16 or 18. So if you really embed social action in primary schools, and then you make it part of the inspection framework, you will inculcate the habits and behaviours that hopefully will carry on beyond, rather than relying on whether you're lucky enough to be in organisations like mine. I would absolutely hardwire it into the formal curriculum.
Thank you, Matt. That's really great. I'm on to my last two questions, and I really do need to sort of be wrapping this up in the next sort of 10 minutes, because I've got to be at a ministerial visit. So just sort of, if we can kind of wrap your answers on these next 2 points into one simple answer, if that's possible. What role have businesses got? How can volunteering organisations integrate with businesses to harness opportunities for volunteering? And can you each comment on the digital divide and what needs to happen in respect of the digital divide, and how dealing with the problems of kit, connectivity and skills provide both solutions to the volunteering problem and opportunities for the volunteering problem? So if you can try and wrap those 2 points up into some short, succinct answers, please. Matt, if I can come to you first, please.
Thanks. I was hoping you weren't going to come to me first.
Oh,
but okay, no, don't worry. I'll be successful. I mean, on the business look, organisations like ours thrive because communities enable it to survive, and that is both local businesses and corporate partners we work with nationally. Those that we work with that are the most enlightened and progressive have volunteering embedded in their HR policies, paid leave for volunteering, flexible working, critical. And that, I was thinking, that might be an interesting opportunity that does come out of COVID. The fact that we're probably less people are going to work 9 to 5, which means that actually you can probably run Beaver Scouts at 6 o'clock, because your shift and your work patterns might be different. So I think there's something quite interesting that comes out of this in terms of a people-oriented solution for HR professionals to grasp, which is, what does the rounded person and the rounded employee look like, where you encourage volunteering, you give them those paid volunteering days, and then you encourage them to bring those skills that they would have learned back into the workplace. And Paul can talk more clearly than me probably about all the brilliant employee volunteering schemes that Volunteering Matters and others have been overseeing in years to come. And then in terms of the digital divide, this is something we have has been a struggle throughout the last 6 months, both again for young people and adult volunteers, in terms of access if they don't have access already. So there's something about digital capability and what we've done in terms of working with other charities or other partner organisations around supplying kit, but that's a bit short term. I think we need something a bit more of a sophisticated solution there. But the other thing, that one of the things I do love about scouting is the intergenerational mixing and the actual transfer of knowledge and skills. And I've seen some of that in evidence of younger people upskilling older people, particularly in relation to digital capability and digital capacity. And I think that there could be quite an interesting program around that. I know Barclays and others have done similar things here, but in terms of how you get that intergenerational transfer of knowledge and skills.
Thank you, Matt. Paul, can I come to you next?
Of course, yeah. In an employee volunteering context, we've been running employee volunteering programs for a couple of decades. Hundreds of businesses, mainly corporates, some SMEs, and there's been a real shift, actually, and in a good way, in corporate thinking around volunteering. And we sort of moved a bit from top-down charity of the year, employee days out doing something in the environment to something a bit more, what do our employees want to do, and what will they get out of it? And how can we support them to do the things they want to do and develop skills? And one great example during the pandemic was the work that we did with Southern Water, where they basically set up with us a telephone befriending system where they were literally just giving 10 minutes during the working day to call an elderly person that lived alone. So they were using their sort of volunteering thought process in a different way, breaking it up into little 10 minutes during the working day where they could add to that community. And that plays into what Matt said about the flexible working and that sort of sense of, actually, this is a really important thing for our employees, and how can we sort of mix that into what we do, as opposed to just have a day a year where we all go out and do something. And if that trend continues to shift, that is inherently a good thing. On the digital divide, I don't claim to be a digital expert in terms of what would increase the capacity and capability of people in a digital sense. But one thing I would say that's important, whilst there still is a digital divide, is to continue to invest in physical community safe spaces for people. And it's not all about digital, actually. And what I would continue to press here is that investment in community infrastructure where it doesn't exist is as important as the digital piece, whilst you do have a digital divide. And bringing people together and being able to address some of these inequalities and social things together in a physical space is as important, particularly when we have a digital divide.
Thanks, Paul. George, coming to you.
Yeah. So on the business side, we see lots of companies make time available for staff to do volunteering. The take up of that is actually really low, and we see, I think Paul touched on it, one of the issues is the top-down approach. And Paul mentioned the charity of the year, you must volunteer for this charity. We definitely are of the view, as you'd expect, being a kind of bigger marketplace of opportunities, that companies should and are starting to do more of this, we think, let their employees decide how they want to use that time, and kind of just make that easy for them. So it's about kind of having that easy tools for employees to get access to, lots of choice, empowering them to decide what is it they're passionate about. And again, the local factor is definitely more of a thing now, so people working from home. So I think the trend is for more of that, which is a good thing, and that will increase take up, we think. And I think the SME space is an interesting one. We've worked with some big corporates like BT and so on, and that's fantastic. But there are hundreds of thousands, if not more, SMEs out there that don't necessarily feel like they have the capabilities or the tools to make employee volunteering a kind of a thing, or to have that kind of outward focused CSR program, let's say. So again, we think actually that's quite untapped, and what we're focused on is making that very easy for them to sign up to a platform like Do It, invite their employees in, have their own private space, and then easily access the national marketplace and network to really kind of make it super kind of straightforward. And it doesn't require lots of thinking or planning or resource or cost even. So it's there's some of the kind of big factors that we're focused on. So we're quite optimistic about that. Government support for that, so maybe the carrot and stick kind of model maybe might be useful. To how do you encourage some of the bigger corporates to maybe support smaller businesses? I think there's a role to play there for the big banks, the big kind of the BTs of the world, etc., who have huge business customer bases, to encourage and support their business customers to kind of to do more, or to provide them the tools to make it easy. So there's some interesting stuff there that's going on that we're trying to play a part in. On the digital divide, on the digital divide, I mean, the young people kind of issue, lots of young people out of work, sadly, that's going to probably be a bigger problem. Older people that maybe are less digitally inclined, there's some big opportunities, we think, to connect the two. So it might be a big program, national initiative, but ultimately we think, we're quite optimistic. Younger people especially are obviously much more tech literate. They do predominantly have smartphones, and people like Vodafone are, giving away data cards and so on. So there is a big effort, I think, already going on to reduce that divide. But I think we can go further and kind of come up with some big national initiatives to connect these obvious things that are happening out there. So the youth unemployment problem, older people that have been maybe isolated or can't use tech as easily. Well, it wouldn't take too much to kind of join the dots there and think creatively about how we kind of solve several problems in one fell swoop. So again, different audiences, different ecosystems, different partners, and just having infrastructure in place that enables that to happen quickly and easily with zero friction, or as little friction as possible. And that's tech can play a part in solving the digital divide, ironically. So yeah, that's my view on those questions.
Thank you, George. And just finally, can I thank you all for your contributions this morning? It's been a fascinating discussion. And could I ask you each to just give us your final thoughts in summary, and anything that you haven't had the opportunity to say in the prepared questions that you'd like to contribute to the group? Could I ask you to give those now? Paul, if I can start with you.
Yes, Peter, I think the one point I would make that underpins this whole thing is what COVID has done from a sector and a volunteering and a government point of view in a good way is bring understanding and connection from government and the sector together in a way that probably wasn't there pre-COVID, if I'm honest. And there's still a long way to go in terms of that understanding in government, into communities, into volunteering in the sector. But those connections have started to be made. And my strong encouragement to this APPG and to politicians and civil servants is to use the vast expertise and knowledge within civil society to help address these problems on a local level, because it's all there. Matt's talked quite eloquently about some of the things that Scouts have done to address underrepresentation. We have hundreds of thousands of charities that are doing this right up and down the country, and they want to help and they want to support. So if we can build on that and ensure that the connections that have been made between civil society and government, which have been weak actually over the last few years, if we're honest, can be developed, and then together we can start to answer some of these questions. And I think you will find the answers in communities. They're already happening. It's just a question of how we take that best practice, like what we're doing in Ipswich, like what Matt said he's doing with particular groups, and then how we apply that into other settings.
Thank you, Paul. Matt, if I can come to you.
So I think what Paul said earlier was correct. I think volunteering's been too peripheral in terms of government agendas. I think it's been a nice to have or a taken for granted, and I don't think we should, because I actually think there is a critical role for the state here to amplify the benefits of volunteering and to enhance the opportunities. And I think this should therefore be central to the Building Back Better philosophy. I think it should be central to levelling up. I think ultimately it's about understanding the benefits and what the mix of individual benefits in terms of health and well-being and belonging and combating loneliness and giving people purpose and joy. And heavens knows we need a bit of that after this year. But also the societal benefits, the fact that you bring people together, you bridge communities. It's exactly as you said, Peter. It's the glue that can bring people together and show there is a life beyond Netflix or staying at home, that actually is about the human connection we have that makes us what we are and makes us thrive. But so I would have a plan and I would invest in it, and you will get incredible support from civil society if you do that.
George, final word from you, please.
It's going to be hard to top that, I think, but can I just agree with what's just been said? Yeah, I mean, it's seeing things through the well-being lens and understanding the value of that. So that's, you know, we agree. I think we think volunteering has not been taken seriously enough in terms of the value it provides to the country, the economy, and so on. And I think for that to kind of change and to increase the understanding of the benefits and the value of that across lots of different themes, as we've talked about, I think then definitely should sharpen the sort of focus on, well, how do we actually, this is a really key thing for the country, and how do we then invest and support that? And for me, that's infrastructure. It's less focus on terminology or programs that are doing well or not doing well, because they come and go, and there'll always be new things. And so infrastructure is key, and I think it's taking a long-term view as well. So it's not a kind of crowd pleaser and short term. It's sort of making decisions that genuinely kind of underpin civil society for the longer term, because that will pay dividends many times over.
Thank you, George. Can I thank you all for your contributions this morning? It's been truly insightful. You've given us some fantastic contributions, which I know will certainly make their way to our final report. As I said, this is our 4th evidence session of 5. We're planning to produce our report for the anniversary of the first lockdown in March. So please do keep an eye out for that when we get that launched. But thank you once again. And if anything else comes to mind that you haven't been able to convey to us verbally, then please do send the further information you have to British Futures.
Thank you very much.